Emmerdale spoilers for Wednesday, the 23rd of July tease that the peaceful rhythm of the Dales is about to be shattered as Moira's steely resolve collides head-on with a darker threat than she could have ever imagined. In the pre-dawn stillness, a low mist hangs over the rolling pastures of Home Farm, as if to signal the storm gathering on the horizon. Moira stands on the edge of her family's land, dew soaking through her boots, her eyes fixed on the ancient stone markers that define every inch of the land she has sworn to protect. Today, she knows a fight is about to be fought, not with polite negotiations or gentle smiles, but with the raw strength of a woman determined to defend her homeland. Jo Tate arrives in the new Bentley that gleams beneath the grey morning sky, its engine's rumble echoing across the fields like a herald of corporate ambition. He steps out, freshly pressed suit crisp against the wind, and approaches Moira with the air of a man certain of victory. In his pocket, a folder lined with legal terms and empty promises. He offers her a seat beneath the old oak, an arrangement, he says, that will suit them both. But Moira's lips tighten the moment he begins to outline his proposal. A handsome sum for her acreage, plus an easement granting Tate Enterprises unfettered access to the riverbank. Think of the legacy we could build, Moira, Jo coos, voice smooth as the silk of his tie. Your land could become the jewel in our latest resort development. You'd be paid handsomely, and you'd remain part of the story. Moira's reply is a single, unwavering shake of her head. No amount of money, she asserts, could compensate for the centuries of history and sweat poured into these fields by her family. She knows the true worth of the land, the hidden springs that water the lambing pastures, the wildlife corridors that wind through the hedgerows, the family graves under the old chapel's floorboards. She won't be bullied or bribed into handing it over. Joe's smile falters for a fraction of a second, before he straightens his shoulders and warns her in clipped tones, "You'll walk away with nothing if you insist on standing in my way." He pockets his folder, body rigid with frustration, and drives off along the dusty lane, leaving Moira alone with her defiant pulse racing. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Kyle watches from the window as Joe's car disappears around the bend. His brow is lined with worry. "Do you really think we'll be safe here?" he asks, voice low. He crosses to stand beside his mother, sliding his arm around her waist. "Joe's rich and ruthless. He said we'd get nothing, Moira." "Nothing." Moira places a reassuring hand on his shoulder, voice soft but firm. "We'll find another way, love. I won't let this land go to him. We'll fight him at every turn and we'll win. I promise you that." But Moira's confidence wavers that night when Kyle bursts into her study, eyes wide with alarm. "Someone's been in the warehouse," he gasps, breath coming in frantic bursts. The old granary at the edge of the field, where Moira stores hay bales, farming tools, and her late husband's keepsakes, has been breached. Moira grabs her torch and follows Kyle through the moonlit yard toward the gap in the heavy wooden doors. There, fresh footprints press into the soft earth, and shards of broken lock litter the threshold. A chill runs down her spine. Joe's warning has already set darker wheels in motion. They step inside, flashlights piercing the shadows. Two masked figures stand near the center beam, arms rummaging through crates. Moira's heart hammers. Without a word, she draws the Colt pistol she keeps for emergencies, its weight a familiar comfort in her palm, and aims. The intruders whirl, eyes gleaming with panic behind their black balaclavas. Moira's command rings out, "Get out, now." The first figure stumbles backward, a muffled curse escaping under his breath. Kyle seizes the moment, grabbing the nearest pitchfork. He lunges, intent on pinning them to the ground, but chaos erupts. The masked man dodges, and Kyle swings the tines wildly, the third prong catching flesh as it passes. The man howls and collapses, pitchfork still lodged in his calf. Moira steps forward, gun leveled between them both, finger hovering over the trigger. The second hooded figure hesitates, doubt flickering in their stance, but then, at Moira's shout, bolts toward the door. She fires a warning shot into the rafters. "Stop, or I will." The fleeing intruder hesitates, flicks off the mask, and Moira's breath catches in her throat as she recognizes Dylan, her foster son, once an eager volunteer at the farm. His blue eyes widen with shock. He scrambles back, fleeing into the night, leaving Kyle kneeling beside the wounded assailant. For a moment, Moira stares at Dylan's receding form, mind spinning. How could he betray them? Why invade their home? Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens crescendos across the fields, and Moira tucks her pistol away as Kyle cradles the injured man's head. "We have to explain," Kyle pleads, fear and guilt mingling in his voice. "Colonel Tate's men, maybe it was him." Moira's jaw sets. "We won't know until we talk to Kane. He'll see through Joe's schemes." At the Wharfdale Arms, Kane Dingle nurses a pint of ale and watches Moira's arrival with narrowed eyes. His broad shoulders tense as she recounts the break-in, the gun, the one who escaped. Kane slams his glass on the table. "Tate's behind this," he growls. "Mark my words, Moira, he wants your land, and now he'll use any dirty trick to get it." Moira's fists clench. "I'll confront him," she declares, voice low and hard. "He needs to know I won't be intimidated." Joe Tate sits in his office later that afternoon, reviewing cost estimates, when Moira strides in unannounced. His surprised look turns to cool dismissal. "I thought you'd reconsidered," he says, leaning back in his leather chair. Moira's eyes burn with fury. "You sent men to ransack my property," she accuses, voice rising. "You threatened my family, and now this." She slaps the mahogany desk, so hard the blotter slides. Joe leans forward, mask of innocence slipping away. "I had nothing to do with that," he insists, tone icy. "No one will get a penny from me if you continue this charade." Moira's lip trembles with righteous anger. Without warning, she throws a punch that catches Joe across the jaw, the crack echoing in the silent office. He staggers, eyes wide with shock and indignation. "You miserable," he begins, but the blow leaves him momentarily stunned. Moira turns on her heel and storms out, leaving Joe cradling his cheek as fury and humiliation coalesce in his gaze. Word of the assault spreads quickly. The following morning, Moira is startled by the shrill ring of her phone, Kyle's face on the screen, white as chalk. "Mum. I heard they've arrested Lydia," he whispers. Lydia Dingle, Kane's niece and Moira's ally, had been taken in for questioning after Dylan, shaken and injured, gave his statement. Moira's heart knots. If Lydia implicated Joe, then she'll be free soon, but now the law has its sights on Moira herself. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrive at Home Farm bearing a warrant. Police Chief Swirling steps from the car, badge gleaming. "Moira Barton Dingle," he announces, "you're under arrest for assaulting Mr. Joseph Tate." Kyle's anguished cry fills the hallway as Moira is led away in handcuffs. In the back of the police car, the weight of what she's unleashed settles like a stone in her gut. Joe has refused to press charges if she agrees to drop her opposition, but he won't negotiate, he makes clear. "You'll rot in prison if you don't stand down." The chilling promise hangs between them as the cruiser's siren fades. Behind bars, Moira sits on the narrow bunk, face pale in the fluorescent light. Kane visits her, fury and concern warring in his eyes. He tells her what his learned, Dylan's clumsy confession pointed to Lydia as the mastermind. She lured Dylan and a second accomplice to the warehouse, hoping to force Moira's hand by threatening her livelihood. Lydia's arrest is meant to corner Moira into capitulation. "I'm so sorry, Mum," Kyle sobs as Kane breaks the news. "I never wanted this to happen." Moira's resolve hardens in that steel cell. Lydia may have betrayed her, but it was Joe who unleashed this chain of blackmail and violence. The battle for home farm's land has escalated into a war of secrets and lies, and Moira knows the next moves will decide not only her freedom, but the soul of the Dales themselves. Across the village, Kane storms into Sam's small flat, slamming the door. Sam startles, eyes wide as Kane's rage breaks free. "Your bloody Dawson family and your Tates," Kane hisses. "You've got to choose, lad. Are you with us or with them?" Sam's heart pounds as he stares at the furious patriarch. He swallows, torn between the loyalty he feels to his foster family and the uneasy alliance he's formed with Joe's camp. Choosing the Tates could mean betraying Kane, and with him, the only family Sam has ever truly known. But siding with the Dingles might doom him to a life on the wrong side of Joe's power. Sam's voice trembles as he meets Kane's glare. "Give me some time," he pleads. But Kane's eyes blaze. "You have until sunset." With that ultimatum, Kane storms out, leaving Sam alone with the impossible choice that will reshape his future, and the fate of every soul caught in the furious dance between Moira and Joe. As dusk settles on the Dales, the land seems to hold its breath. Moira fights for her freedom and her home from behind cold steel bars. Lydia faces the consequences of betrayal, while Dylan nurses wounds both physical and emotional. Kyle waits in anguish, his trust in family torn apart. Kane readies himself for the next confrontation, and Sam stands at a crossroads between blood and ambition. In the silent fields and brooding skies, Emmerdale's most dangerous battle has only just begun, and the echoes of betrayal will ring out long after the final verdict is delivered. Moira's cell door clanged shut behind Kane, leaving her alone with the harsh glare of the overhead light and the unyielding metal bed. Every breath echoed in the small room as she wrestled with the whirlwind of betrayals and schemes that had brought her here. Lydia's arrest had cut her to the core, her friend and confidant now branded a criminal mastermind, and Dylan's terrified flight still haunted her conscience. But the greatest wound was knowing that Joe Tate had orchestrated the entire confrontation, his polished threats driving those she loved into desperate acts. In the dim corridor outside, Kyle paced, torn between fury at Lydia's deception and guilt over Dylan's injury. He replayed, again and again, the moment he raised the pitchfork, his hands shaking as the tines pierced flesh he never intended to harm. As he returned Moira's cell key to the guard, his eyes met his mother's through the bars, her silent plea mirrored by his own ache to make things right. When the guard escorted him into the visiting booth, Kyle sank into the plastic chair, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't know whose side to take. Lydia, she said you were selling up secretly. I panicked." Moira's stern features softened, and she reached across the glass, as close as prison rules would allow. "I know you were scared," she said. "But fear makes us act without thinking. We'll clear your conscience and this place, soon enough." Outside, Kane and Sam stood in the courtyard under the late afternoon sun. Kane's jaw was set like iron as he turned to Sam. "You've got until sundown to choose, lad. The Dingles or the Tates. No half measures." Sam swallowed, the weight of the ultimatum pressing on him like lead. On one side stood Kane, his adoptive uncle, whose rough affection and fierce loyalty had guided Sam through every hardship. On the other, Joe Tate, smoothing away his ruthless ambition behind a charismatic smile, offered resources, influence, and the promise of a future unburdened by petty vendettas. But to pledge to Joe would betray all that Kane had taught him: honor, family, standing up for the underdog. As the sun dipped lower, Sam closed his eyes, struggling to find the words that could spare him Kane's wrath without damning his own soul. Meanwhile, Lydia sat in a stark interview room at the station, Detective Sergeant Swirling questioning her through a thin pane of glass. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red from tears, but there was something fierce in her gaze as she listened to the accusations. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," she insisted, voice trembling. I just wanted to scare her, to make Moira back down. When Swirling leaned forward, citing the damage to home farm and the potential for manslaughter charges, Lydia flinched at the word manslaughter, but pressed on. I thought Dylan would talk me out of it. I never wanted to see him bleed. Her confession was raw enough that Swirling agreed to pass her case to the Crown Prosecution Service for review, with a recommendation for charge mitigation, if she cooperated fully. Corporate lawyers might argue she was a political pawn in Joe Tate's land grab, and they would exploit that. Back at the garage where Kevin had once fought fruitlessly to clear Carl's sabotage, a fresh front line opened. Sam, unaware of Kane's growing fury, arrived to collect his things before heading to the station to record his statement on Lydia's case. He found Kane leaning against the car wash, arms crossed. Kane's voice was low but thunderous. Well? Have you decided? Sam looked at the ground. I can't work for Joe, Kane. I can't. Relief and disappointment mingled in Kane's features. You and me, then, Kane said quietly. We'll get your mum out of that cell, and we'll bury Tate's scheme once and for all. Sam nodded, but the tremor in his clenched fists revealed his lingering doubt. Turning his back on Joe would mark him as an enemy in Tate Enterprises' book, a dangerous label to bear. That evening, Moira heard the news via Kane's whispered update in the visiting booth. Sam had chosen the Dingles. A spark of pride warmed her, tempered by concern for Sam's safety. Joe would not forget such a betrayal. You know what comes next, Kane warned her. He'll strike back, hard. Moira's green eyes blazed. Let him. I'll be ready. In the crisp dusk air, Carl paced the front gates of Home Farm. Lydia's bail conditions forbade her from contacting him or Moira until her hearing, but that did little to calm the roiling storm inside him. He knew Lydia had masterminded the break-in at Moira's behest, but had she reacted to whispers planted by Joe? Kyle was determined to find out. Slipping into the old granary under the cover of darkness, he searched for clues among the crates and hay bales. Beneath a bundle of farm records, he discovered a single envelope marked with Joe Tate's corporate seal. Inside lay copies of letters, legal notices meant for Moira, alongside forged entries showing she planned to sell the land. Someone had slipped them under her door. His heart pounded. Joe's men had framed Moira and turned Lydia into a scapegoat. Meanwhile, Joe Tate stood in his glass-walled office, watching the setting sun gild the fields he coveted. His phone buzzed, his lawyer with an update on Lydia's cooperation. A bitter smile curved his lips when he learned Sam had repudiated his offer. So much for loyalty, Joe murmured. He tapped his finger against the desk, considering his next move. A landowner like Moira, once isolated, could be worn down by legal fees, public opinion, or a well-placed scandal. He would leverage every tool at his disposal. But first, he had to neutralize Sam, the one loose thread in his plan. Deep into the night, Kyle slipped Lydia's case files to Kane and Sam in the Dingle kitchen, along with the forged letters from Joe. The flickering candlelight revealed the strains on all their faces. He set her up, Kyle said, voice thick. This was never about words. He wanted action, to scare Mum into signing away everything. Kane slammed his fist on the table. Then we make him pay. Sam exhaled, resolve hardening. What's the plan? Kane outlined a two-pronged strategy. First, expose the forgeries to Chief Swirling and the CPS, clearing Lydia's name and unraveling Joe's framing. Second, wage a public campaign, a rally of Dingle tenants and local farmers, backed by evidence of Tate's underhanded tactics, to pressure the council into imposing a moratorium on the development. Moira's deep roots in the community would sway public sentiment more than any lawsuit. Sam, Kyle, and Kane would spearhead the grassroots effort. The next morning, Moira sat in the courtroom gallery, flanked by Kane, Sam, Kyle, and Lisa, a local solicitor, who had volunteered her services. Across the bench, Joe Tate gazed at her with icy contempt. The prosecutor laid out the forged land sale documents, presenting expert testimony that the signatures were falsified and the letters backdated. Lydia's own tearful testimony, bolstered by Kyle's discovery of Joe's seal on the envelopes, completed the picture. Chief Swirling found himself in the awkward position of having to explain how his initial investigatory focus had been derailed by corporate lies. When the magistrate dismissed the charges against Lydia and Moira, a cheer rose from the gallery. Moira's tears of relief glistened as she embraced her son. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Joe, cameras flashing as he attempted damage control. He issued a carefully worded statement, accusing unnamed malcontents of smearing his good name, but his thin veneer of invincibility had cracked. The local farmers interviewed by the press recounted Joe's threats and the violation of Moira's farm, shifting public sentiment decisively against Tate Enterprises. Emboldened by the courtroom victory, the Dingles and their allies organized a march along the boundary of Home Farm, carrying placards declaring "Hands off our land," and "Dales belong to the people." Kyle, leading the chant alongside Sam and Kane, felt a surge of pride. They were defending not just property, but heritage. Moira stood at the head of the procession, shotgun slung across her back, more symbol than weapon, her gaze unflinching. In his office, Joe watched footage of the march on multiple screens. The protest was peaceful, but massive, and council members had begun to distance themselves from his project. His executive assistant entered, eyes wide with concern. "Sir, the council meeting has been postponed." Pressure's mounting. Joe's fists clenched. All the legal might in the world wouldn't quiet the voices of a united community. He realized, finally, that he'd underestimated Moira's bonds to the Dales, and to her family. That night, Kane and Sam sat around a bonfire in the old pig pen, toasting with mugs of ale. "You did good, lad," Kane told Sam, clapping him on the shoulder. Sam's grin was shy but genuine. "I just did the right thing." Kyle joined them, handing Kane a pat of homemade butter, Moira's recipe, to spread on fresh bread. They laughed, the easy camaraderie a balm after weeks of tension. But high above, in the attic office of Home Farm, Moira stared out over the fields, heart still racing from the day's triumph. Winning the battle did not mean the war was over. Joe Tate was a man accustomed to having his way, and if he couldn't buy her, he might resort to violence next. And there remained the fragile rifts between Lydia and Dylan, whose trust had been broken. Moira vowed to rebuild her family's bonds, but she knew healing would take time. Tomorrow, she would call the council to solidify the moratorium. She would visit Lydia in the pub, and reach out to Dylan with an apology that carried no demands. And she would meet with Sam and Kyle to plan the